begins. So I'd like to begin as usual by wishing everyone a good evening, good night, good morning, good whatever time of day it happens to be where you are, and whichever day you're listening or watching this class. And we will begin as usual by reciting the prayers of going for refuge and reciting and arousing bodhicitta. So I'd like to ask you to please recite these prayers with faith and devotion. One moment. Oh, that's the wrong page. Sorry, that's still left over from yesterday. Okay. O Sangye Chodan Sogi Chodam La Chancho Bardo Dani Chapsum Chi Dagi Chenyen Gi Pesanam Ji Dola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sangye Chodan Sogi Chodam La Chancho bardo dane chapsum che dagi chenyen gi pesanam gi drola penjer sanje drobar sho sangye chedan sogi chonam la Chancho bardo dane chapsum che dagi chenyen gi pesanam gi dola penjer sanje robar sho until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Semjen tamje dewa tan dewe judan dembari jurje donga dan donga ji judan rawa jurje donga mebe dewa tampa tan min rawa jurje nyerin shadan nitan rawa danyon shambola nebra jurchik. May all sentient beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, free of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free of attachment or hatred for those near or far. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the 3 times, who shows me directly in my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And now please think to yourselves that we must bring all of our mothers all sentient beings throughout space who at some point in the past have been our mothers. Or another way of putting it is at some point in the past, we've had intimate relations, or not, that's a bad way to say it. We've had really close relationships with any sentient being there is in some point in the past because of it's the mathematics of infinity. If there's an infinite number of lives, then it's almost certain, it is certain that you have been connected to any given sentient being at least once in that infinite series of lives. And if you've been connected to them at least once, then you've been connected to them a million times, or an infinite number of times. And so there have been an infinite number of times when we have been any given sentient being's parent, or we've been their child, we've been their friend, we've been their partner, we've been in any number of different close relations where we've depended upon them. And even in this lifetime, we depend entirely upon other sentient beings. Our body is filled with 84,000 different kinds of sentient beings, it is said in the sutras. Probably most of those are in what they now call the gut biome. And if it weren't for those sentient beings, we wouldn't be able to live. We wouldn't be able to digest food. If it weren't for all the tiny insects that aerate the soil and take care and allow food to grow and so forth, we wouldn't be able to live. We wouldn't be able to eat anything. We wouldn't have anything to wear. And so I think it's pretty clear that there, if we weren't somehow, there's some connection that can relate us to any of the sentient beings on the planet even in this lifetime. And so if we're dependent upon them and we're dependent upon other sentient beings and think about the connections that we have with them, then, it's only reasonable to feel grateful for them. Even when they appear to us in in an aggressive or harmful form, even when they appear to us as our least favorite politicians. And most of us have least favorite politicians. And so no matter what you think about even your least favorite politician, there's still someone whom you depend upon. And someone who experiences pain. Someone who just wants to be happy, just as ourselves. And since they have done many good things for us in the past, it's important for us to try to do the best things that we can for them. Just imagine if we could bring our least favorite politicians to the state of Buddhahood, and then all the world leaders would become Buddhas, because all politicians are someone's least favorite person. And so if we bring all these least favorite people to the state of Buddhahood, then the world would just absolutely wonderful. So it's important for us to have this broad attitude towards all sentient beings of really wanting to free them from all sorts of suffering and bring them to the complete state of happiness. For any other sort of happiness is only going to be temporary. We can find some sort of social peace or harmony that's going to last for a little while, but even while it's lasting, it's going to exclude some people, and certainly exclude some animals, a lot of animals. And it's not going to last very long, 20, 30 years. If you've got a good social compact in a country, then it's going to dissolve, and the next generation is going to have to rebuild it. And along the way, sometimes it won't rebuild well, and then there'll be conflict and strife and all sorts of problems in the world. And so no matter what we do socially, it's of course good. But what we really need to do is work to bring all sentient beings to the state of Buddhahood. And in order to do that, we have to become Buddhas ourselves. And in order to become Buddhas ourselves, we have to meditate. But to meditate, we can't do that if we are blind and don't know what's happening. So in order to uncover that, on the highest level, of course, from the perspective of most Tibetan traditions, you need to follow your guru, follow the instructions of a qualified guru. But even to do that, if you do not have the foundation of the teachings in the more fundamental basic teachings of Buddhism, what we often call the foundation vehicle, or in Sanskrit it's called Hinayana, and Tibetan the Tekpa Memba, which could be interpreted as a derogatory term. And so actually what it really means, it's like the basis. This is the foundation. And so this is the text, the teachings that we're talking about now. And I think as we think about them, if you really think about the teachings of the Abhidharma, they're a lot more profound than you'd think when you hear about them from the perspective of the Vajrayana teachings or even of the middle way teachings. There's a lot of dismissal of them. But on the other hand, they're incredibly profound. They're incredible. From our perspective as ordinary individuals, they're incredibly profound because we haven't got even to that level of view. And so we need to work hard to understand these. And so please think to yourselves that it is important to study this material for that very reason of coming to understand like the basic fundamental teachings so that we can then actually take the steps to Buddhahood. And please listen with this motivation of bodhicitta this morning. Now, the Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. Within the Abhidharma, there's the foundation vehicle. We can generally divide it into two. There's the foundation vehicle tradition of Abhidharma, and there is the Mahayana Abhidharma. And again, you might think, well, the Mahayana Abhidharma is really important. Of course it is. But in the Abhidharma text that is included among the 5 great texts in Tibetan Buddhism is the text, the Treasury of Abhidharma. It's a really important treatise. It's very clear and thorough, and yet it is also fairly short. I mean, I think you've got the presentations of Abhidharma in all of Sangha's works, and they're just really many volumes of different works. And so this is actually bringing it all together into a, and also even in the Great Exposition, the Great Exposition itself, the actual text that gave the school its name, is huge. And so this text really condenses the main points into 8 chapters that are relatively easy to get our minds around, that we can think about. And then, of course, Wangchuk Dorje then kind of brings just really the most important points out. There is a lot of other debates that are found in the auto commentary, that is the commentary that Vasubandhu himself wrote on his root verses. And there also is even more in the other commentaries, such as Yashomitra's and so forth, which I have referred to a few times. And I'm not going through all of the different little points in there, because we're talking about foundations of Abhidharma. The point is that by studying this material now, we need to gain a foundation. And then if we want to continue studying Abhidharma, there are more resources to look at. In particular, there are a couple of different translations of the, of the auto commentary by Vasubandhu. And there also is a translation of the Chim Abhidharma, which is like one of the most highly regarded Tibetan commentaries in the Abhidharma. And both of those are more extensive than Wangchuk Dorje's commentary. So if you want to continue studying, those are good things to think about. But the point is, you have to have a basic idea. Like if you dive right into a huge text on Abhidharma, that would take us long. At the rate that I've been teaching, we'd probably over a couple months a year for 3 years, and not even that really. We wouldn't even be through the 2nd or 3rd chapter if we were going through one of these huge commentaries, one of the larger chapters. Well, maybe we'd be through the 2nd chapter, somewhere in the 3rd or 4th chapter, as opposed to now starting the 8th chapter. But we want to, if you have a basic idea of what's going on, that's the beauty of these shorter commentaries. You get a basic idea, not everything. So you have a framework to put everything in. And then if you want to engage in more study, then you have like a place to put everything. You've got like the basic framework where you can fit everything, and this is where it goes. You have a basic idea, and it makes it much easier to progress through further study. So that's the reason for studying the 9th Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje's commentary. There's also the 8th Karmapa Mithya Dorje's longer commentary. And there is a group of translators who are working on translating actually all of the 8th Karmapa's great commentaries into English. And I'm not sure how long it's going to take them. It's not a small job. And when that is done, then of course we have a very long and very detailed, really excellent commentary. I haven't studied the whole thing. That's another reason why I'm not teaching it. I haven't studied it myself. But I've looked through parts of it. I've referred to it. And it's an excellent commentary. So at some point in the relatively near future, that should be translated, and then how it'll be made available is of course an entirely different question, but we'll see how that goes. So there are going to be more and more availables on Abhidharma available for everyone who is interested in continuing studies. At any rate, to get back to our main topic, which is the actual text. Today we are beginning the 8th area, and this 8th area is actually not particularly long. It's some 40, 50 stanzas. I don't remember what's the actual length in stanzas. 43 stanzas. So, and you can tell if you look at the book. It's harder to tell from an ebook, but if you have the actual physical book, you can see that it's actually not a very long chapter. So as a result, we will be able to finish this by the end of next week. I'd had some thought that it might be nice to end on the full moon day, which is a week from tomorrow. But I'm not sure if I can stretch it out that long. We'll see. We'll see how much I digress over the next few days. And it's also possible that we might not have class next Tuesday. I'll get back to you on that. We might have a puja here at the Trango Monastery. And if that is the case, then we won't have class, but I will let you know about that tomorrow. So the 8th area, the teachings on the absorptions, and the absorption here means meditative absorptions, the different types of deep states of meditation. That's what probably we'd call them in English. Deep states of meditation. So we're at the beginning of this chapter. And so to bring it up. Yes, the 8th area, teachings on absorptions, which is on page 543 of the printed book. So this 8th area begins with, again, 2 verses of prostration and then a pledge to compose. From the fields that bring happiness to great cooling groves, he went at his leisure, the glorious Lama, and then gave the gift of this feast that supremed beings of this fortunate eon. I prostrate to him. And so here, this is another prostration to probably to Wangchuk Dorje's root Lama, the Shamar Kunchu Yanlak, sometimes called Shamar Kunchu Bang. He has like many Tibetan lamas, he has several different names that are used in different contexts. So the 5th Shamar Rinpoche, he was a student of the 8th Karmapa Mikyo Dorje, and a really pretty impressive lama in his own right. And he also then became the root teacher of the 9th Karmapa, Wangchuk Dorje. So that is the prostration to him. The causal resultant pure dhyanas, the formless, the 8 emancipations, all-encompassing, etc., the 8th part, the treasury that teaches absorption. If you wish to know these all with ease, enjoy this. So here, actually, Wangchuk Dorje is giving us a list of everything that is explained in this chapter. The causal dhyana and resultant pure dhyanas, the formless, the 8 emancipations, the all-encompassing sense bases, and so forth. These are various different types of meditation that are mentioned in these sutras, things that are practiced, different levels of meditation that you can get to. And particularly when we're talking about like the 8 emancipations, the all-encompassing sense bases, the overpowering sense bases, and so forth. These are all levels of greater and greater strength in meditation, especially as practiced in the foundation vehicle teachings. And so these are all taught in this 8th part of the treasury that teaches the absorption or deep samadhi. So if you wish to know these all with ease, enjoy this. So the 8th area, the teachings on the absorptions, has first an explanation of the text of the area, and second, an explanation of the branch that completes the composition, the summary of the treatise. In other words, so the 8th chapter basically has 2 parts. There's the basic text of the 8th chapter, and then at the end, there is the conclusion of the entire treatise. So the explanation of the text of the area has 3 topics. The explanation of the dhyanas and the formless, the classifications of samadhi, and the explanations of qualities supported by samadhi. So here we're talking about samadhi. So basically the kind of way the chapter links to the previous chapter is that In the previous chapter, we were talking about the 10 knowings and the qualities of the knowings. And so how is it that we develop these knowings? Well, we develop them through meditation, in particular through the dhyanas. To a lesser extent through the formless, but in particular, we accomplish them through the dhyanas. In fact, the dhyanas are important for going through the path as well. So we need to know what the dhyanas are. And then the formless samadhis are also important meditations that are practiced. So we also need to understand them. So we'll begin with the explanation of the dhyanas and the formless. And this has two topics. The individual explanations and understanding them in common. In other words, what are the common features of these different topics? So the individual explanations, this has three topics: an explanation of the dhyanas, an explanation of the formless, and a summary of both. So the explanation of the dhyanas has two topics: the classifications and the individual natures. So the classifications. It says here, the first line of the chapter reads, the dhyanas are twofold, they are four. So in other words, with the dhyanas, the four dhyanas, there are two types. There's the causal dhyana and there is the resultant dhyana. But they are also four in that there's the first, second, third, and fourth dhyana. So in other words, you have a causal and resultant first dhyana, causal and resultant second dhyana, causal and resultant third dhyana, and the causal and resultant fourth dhyana. So what do we mean by those, by causal and resultant? Well, to read the commentary, the qualities of the knowings have been explained in the sections on the knowings. Now the other qualities must be told. Because they support all the qualities, first we must begin with the explanation of the dhyanas. So the dhyanas are the support for these four dhyanas, or the two types of the causal and the resultant, are the basis or the support for all different qualities. It's because you can achieve all of the different qualities on the dhyanas. The formless meditations are a little bit different. The formless meditations do, of course, support some qualities, but they don't support all the qualities. In other words, you can achieve all of the results, all of the benefits from the dhyana meditation alone without using the formless meditations. Well, except for maybe some of them. I guess you do need the formless meditation for some of them, but all of them are based upon the dhyanas. So that's why the dhyanas in particular are called the support of all the qualities. They're considered the supreme of paths, as we discussed in the last chapter. The support of the qualities, the dhyanas, are in brief twofold through the distinctions between the resultant birth and causal absorption. So the resultant birth, that means when you meditate on the first dhyana, then you are reborn in your next lifetime, unless of course you achieve liberation first, you are reborn in the form realm, in the first level of form. That is the resultant. So the causal one is the dhyana that you do in a prior lifetime, and then the resultant is the rebirth that comes out of that. So if you meditate upon the first dhyana in this lifetime, that is the causal absorption that then leads to the resultant dhyana of rebirth in the form, in the first level of form. If you meditate upon the second dhyana in this lifetime, that's the causal absorption that then leads to rebirth in the three levels of the second level of form. So these are explained in the third chapter, which we went through last spring. And so we don't need to go into that in detail now, but that's what it's saying. So causal means the dhyana that you do in this lifetime. Resultant means the rebirth in one of the levels of form in your next. So that's what we mean by the resultant birth and the causal absorption. They are each of the four of the first jhana and so forth. So there are the causal and resultant, the first, second, third, and fourth jhanas. So what are the individual natures of these? So those are two topics. The first is the reason the resultant jhanas of birth are not explained here. And the second is understanding the causal jhanas of absorption. So the reason the resultant jhanas of birth are not explained here is that rebirth there, that is in the form realms, has been fully explained. Rebirth in the dhyanas will not be further discussed here, because the dhyanas of birth there, that is in the form realm, have been fully explained in the Treasury that teaches the world, the third area of the Treasury. So how are they explained, you ask? They're explained in the verses. Each of the dhyanas has 3 levels, but the fourth dhyana has 8 levels. So that is described back in the 3rd chapter. So now what's really our topic for this chapter is the actual, or for today is the causal jhanas of absorption. And so this has two topics: their general essence and their individual essences. So the general essence has 2 points, and the first is the actual general essence. Absorption is one-pointed virtue. So the causal absorption of dhyana is without differentiation. In other words, all dhyana is the same in being one-pointed virtue because it is samadhi by nature. So in other words, when you are in the dhyanas of the first, in practicing the dhyana meditations, say as a human being, before you achieve that, that's the causal dhyana, the causal absorption. When you're doing that, it's one-pointed virtue. So one-pointed means that basically you're not distracted. You're just resting without distraction on that samadhi. So when we say virtue, that means afflicted and non-obscured, neutral, one-pointed minds are excluded. So they're not what we mean right here. Of course, there are, as we'll discuss in a few moments, there are some things that are called neutral or afflicted dhyana, but they are not what we mean here by the actual absorptions, one-pointed virtue. So resting your mind, it's a virtuous mind state where you're resting one-pointedly on virtue. Now, this can also, it can be just the mind, or it also can mean all of the different things that are associated with it. And when it's including what is associated, it's following 5 aggregates. So when it is including its following, or the associated dharmas, it is known as the 5 aggregates by nature. So it's all 5 aggregates of form, feelings, conception, formation, and perception. Because they include imperceptible forms and so forth, the rest of the 5 aggregates. The imperceptible forms are the forms of vows. So there are the vows of dhyana, which of course someone in the dhyana realm has. They may also have the vows of individual liberation, for example, the 5 lay precepts or the monastic vows. So these are that would be the aggregate of form. And then of course there's also feeling, and conception and formation and consciousness at the same time. So they include all 5 aggregates. But now the question is actually what we're really talking about when we're talking about samadhi or dhyana. We're talking about resting one-pointedly. But there's also a mental factor called samadhi. If you, back in the 2nd chapter in the teaching, where in the area where it teaches the mental factors, it teaches that there are several different groups of mental factors that engage together. And there's one of them that's called the major ground of mind. And that's the 5 mental factors that kind of always go with every cognition. And that one, or the major ground of cognition, I should say, that major ground of cognition that includes a mental factor called samadhi. And it is described in the section on the mental factors as being resting one-pointedly. So that is concurrent with, that is associated with every single cognition. Does that mean that we're always in samadhi? We're not so lucky. If it would be as easy as that, it would be easy, then we'd be much further along. So when what do we mean by what is so-called one-pointedness? It is called that because the mind rests one-pointedly on the focus of equipoise. And so the Great Exposition says that the dharma, that is the mental factor of samadhi that makes cognition rest in equipoise, is samadhi, and that itself is one-pointedness. So in the Great Exposition tradition, what we're basically saying is that you've got this mental factor of one-pointedness that rests on the object. And this is like the quality that makes the mind rest one-pointed from one moment to moment. Of course, in every given moment, the mind is, what do we say? The mind is momentary. And so in any given moment, there are the, what do we say? In every given moment, the mind is only on one focus. The individual instants of mind are too short for the mind to shift focus. So in that sense, you could say that every faculty, or that every moment of a cognition would be one-pointed. But here what we actually mean is like there's this quality, this mental factor that allows the mind to go from moment to moment on the same focus over time. So that capability is also present even on the first moment. And so that is the faculty that we're talking about. And so otherwise, there would be no point in saying that there is a mental factor of samadhi. Why would the Buddha have taught that there is a mental factor of samadhi if that wasn't what he meant? That's basically the position of the Great Exposition School. So now, but the reason why, but this is present with every single cognition. We've got that. You could think of that as like we have the capacity to do it on every single cognition, but we don't necessarily have the ability to do it. For example, it's like you've got a battery that's nearly run out. It just doesn't have enough power to run your phone. Your phone is going to shut off. You get a little message saying your phone is going to shut off in a few seconds. And then you say, I have no battery life left. Well, actually, you still got 3%, right? But you say you've got no battery life left. In the same way, normally we're kind of running on low battery samadhi. We haven't got any, we've got like almost no samadhi running. It's just very, very weak. But we can increase that. And when the strength of that samadhi becomes strong, then the mind will rest one-pointedly on virtue. And so that's why I say it's because in most ordinary cognitions, the samadhi, that mental factor samadhi, is just too weak. And so that is what we mean. Now, there are also other schools that explain it a little bit differently. For example, the Sutra school says that the cognitions with the same focus only are samadhi, and that other dhammas, such as mental factors, are not. So the Sutra school is basically saying here, okay, wait a minute, but it's kind of like it's the mind that's important. It's the main primary mind. And then the mental factors go along with that. They're not totally unimportant, but it's really the mind that is the primary thing. Otherwise, like the Buddha taught that when he taught the three trainings, he taught that there is the superior training in discipline, the superior training in mind, which means samadhi, and there is the superior training in prajna. So he called the superior training in samadhi, he called it mind. So it must be the whole mind, the primary mind, as opposed to an individual mental factor. And that primary mind, when it rests on the same focus over and over again. So that's the basic position of the Sutra school. So they're just saying that actually the word refers to the mind, the consciousness itself, as opposed to a mental factor. So the Great Exposition, of course, disagrees with this. They say that it's the mental factor, and there are various reasons, but basically that's the meaning. They say that it's that mental factor. So then the question is, well, when we say dhyana, what do we actually mean by the word dhyana? We're calling it dhyana. So what is that? Well, the meaning of dhyana is really, as described in the auto commentary. It comes from, or not totally described, it's described in the auto commentary with a little bit of help from the Sanskrit dictionaries. And the Sanskrit, basically, dhyana comes from the word dhya, or the verbal root dhya, which means to ponder or contemplate. So that's what the basic meaning is. So dhyana is basically like pondering or contemplating. So it's a particular type of meditation. So in some places, this can be translated as meditation. But when we look at it, there's also another Sanskrit word that we don't usually, or well, actually we sometimes do translate dhyana as meditation, but there's also another Sanskrit word that we translate as meditation, which is a Sanskrit word, bhavana, which got translated into Tibetan as gompa. And then gompa is what we usually translate as a meditation in English. And that word primarily means cultivating or familiarizing yourself, basically working at something to get to know it better. Like when you're doing shamatha meditation, you're cultivating a mind that rests stably. When you're doing insight meditation, you're cultivating or familiarizing yourself with the insight into the nature and so forth. So that's what we usually translate as meditation. And I think this is common in many types of, in many of the Buddhist traditions. And And the dhyanas are often translated as a separate word. In the Pali tradition, in the Theravada tradition, they'll use the word jhana, which is the Pali cognate. And in the Sanskrit, in the Mahayana traditions, we're more likely to use the word dhyana. The word dhyana in modern Hindi just means meditation. Actually, they'll just say doing any meditation, they'll call it dhyana. So that it does have that sense, but it's also a specific type of meditation. And so that's why here in this translation I've been using, and usually I use the word dhyana because it's a specific type. So it's what holds you there. It's what allows you to contemplate and allows you to ponder and reflect and in a sense meditate. So this contemplation and so forth is actually in its essence, according to the Great Exposition, in its essence, it is prajna. And so in that way, it is that's what the word actually means. So that's essentially what we mean by the word jhana. So to return to the text here. Oh, am I showing you the wrong one? No. That's the one I'm showing you. You're seeing the one in English, right? Just make sure, yes. Okay. So the Great Exposition School and the Sutra schools both make many propositions. The term is explained as meaning that it makes the mind contemplate. So I've just been through that in a little bit of detail. So basically, there are different positions from the Great Exposition Sutra. There's a bit of back and forth that is described at some length in the auto commentary, a little bit more detail in the Yashomitra. The Chim Abhidharma, the ornament of Abhidharma, does not, it has basically the similar amount of detail as the auto commentary. So now the individual essences, and this has 2 points, the essence of the first jhana. So we talk about the first jhana first, and then we go through the second one. So the first jhana, it says, it has examining joy and pleasure. So the one-pointed virtuous first jhana, has examining joy and pleasure. So these are 3 different qualities, or 3 different mental factors actually, that are present when you have this. And in fact, when you say examining, that also includes the mental factor of considering. How is that? As Wanchuk Dorje says, saying examining explains that considering is also present, because they function together like fire and smoke. When you have examining, then it's like considering comes first, then examining comes after that. I translate them as considering and examining, but other translators, including Ian Cochrane and translators from the Theravada tradition, talk about them as being initial application and sustained application. So the initial application is like the considering. It's kind of looking at it on a gross level, and then the sustained application is looking at it on the detail. That's the difference. The Vasubandhu describes the difference between considering and examining as being coarse and fine. So considering is kind of looking at things on a gross, on an over level, and then examining is looking at them on a fire level. So in order to have that examining, you have to also have the consideration. So when you say examining, that just automatically says, okay, there's also considering. So you've got these 3. So these 3. So without considering, there's no examining that possesses joy and pleasure. So if you're going to have an examination that also has the branches of joy and pleasure, then you also have to have considering. So these are the 4 branches of the first jhana. Now we'll go through the branches of all the jhanas again, probably tomorrow. But basically the first jhana has these 4, considering and examining, and only examining is mentioned here, joy and pleasure. And then the essence of the remaining jhanas is the earlier branches are discarded. And so the second jhana discards the first branch. The third jhana discards the second. And the fourth jhana discards all 3 of these. They have other branches. They have other factors about them. But they discard the branches of the first jhana. So the remaining jhanas are one-pointed virtue that in which the earlier branches of considering, examining, and so forth are discarded. So how is it that they are discarded? Well, you've got all 4, considering, examining, joy, and pleasure on the first jhana. The second jhana has discarded examination, and therefore also consideration, but possesses joy and pleasure, right? Then the third jhana has discarded examination and joy, but it possesses pleasure. And then the fourth jhana has abandoned examination, joy, and pleasure. And then it has other factors such as pliability and so forth. So those are, that's how it works. Basically, the branches of the first jhana compared to the desire realm are really great. And they're just really wonderful. And in comparison to the higher jhanas, they're still pretty coarse. They're subtler than the desire realm, but coarser than the higher level. And so they're gradually abandoned in order. So an explanation of the formless realm. So we've been through the essences of the form realm. So to talk about the formless realm here, and this has three topics: their general essence, their individual essences, and an elaboration. So their general essence has 2 points. The formless are like, it says, they're like the jhanas. Well, how are they like the jhanas? As it says in the commentary. The formless are like those jhanas in that they have the resulting formless of birth and the causal formless of absorption. In other words, there's the resulting formless, which is birth in the formless realm, and the causal formless of absorption. So if you are in the first jhana the first of the jhanas, the jhana of infinite space, you'd achieve that here in the desire realm of the human, or if you achieve it in the form realm, then you in your next lifetime are born in the level of infinite space. And so forth. So for each of the 4 jhanas, there are the causal and the resultant and the causal. So their births have been explained, and this was also explained in the 3rd chapter. But there are things that are dissimilar about the formless and the jhanas, and one of them is how many aggregates are there? 4 aggregates, including their associations. There are 4 aggregates because there's no form that accompanies them. So the jhanas are 5. There are 5 because there is the imperceptible form with the jhanas, but there is no form on the formless realm. Well, we'll get to that one in a moment. But here, generally, the great exposition position is that there's no form, and therefore no imperceptible forms on the jhana in the formless realms, and so therefore there are only 4 aggregates. Now, the individual essences of each of these, they're born of withdrawal from lower levels. So the one-pointed virtue born of withdrawal from the lower level of the 4th jhana is the sense base of infinite space. So what this means, the sense base here is another term meaning absorption. And actually, it's probably an overly literal translation that I will reconsider when I go through and update this text, which of course means that I have to get time to update this text. But it's definitely one of those things, because it's the same word in Sanskrit and in Tibetan. And it says ayatana in Sanskrit, it's kyeche in Tibetan. And so I just kind of mechanically did the same thing in English. It's not necessarily the same sense. What it means is that it's like a support. It's like a basis, a foundation or a basis for that basis of meditation that is called infinite space. So you withdraw from the 4th jhana and you achieve this level of infinite space. And so what is born from withdrawal from that is the sense base of infinite consciousness. So you're just withdrawing from coarser to subtler levels of meditation. What is born from withdrawal from that is the sense base of nothingness. And what is born from withdrawal from nothingness is the sense base of neither conception nor non-conception. This is what we also call the peak of existence. Thus, there are the 4 formless meditations. So what do you mean by withdrawal? So withdrawal here is the path that separates completely from the lower level because you become detached to it. So when you achieve the 1st level of formless, then you've detached yourself from the 4th level of jhana. You've gone above that to the next level, right? So you've withdrawn from that, you've detached to that. And then you withdraw from that and detach yourself from the attachment to that level of meditation, to a subtler level of meditation called infinite space. And then from that to the level of nothingness, and then from that to the level of neither conception nor non-conception. So they are called with 3 preparations, destruction of conception of form. So they, that is the four formless meditations, are called, along with their three higher preparations, by the name destruction of the conception of form. So there's no longer any conception of form. They destroy the conception of form. So they are called the destruction of the conception of form, because there is no form on their own level, and they do not focus on the defiled form of lower levels. So they don't look at form in lower levels on the defiled forms. They don't have any form on their own level, so they don't focus on form. So there's no conception of form. So this includes the four main formless practices, that is infinite space, infinite consciousness, infinite space, infinite consciousness, and nothingness, and neither conception, and so forth. And it also includes the preparations for the three higher levels, the preparation for infinite consciousness and nothingness, and the preparations for neither conception nor non-conception. But it doesn't include the preparation for the first level of jhana, or of the formless, the level of infinite space. And the reason why is, as it says in the commentary, the preparation for infinite space is a conception that views the form of the fourth jhana as coarse and so forth. So it is looking at form and saying, this is coarse. So therefore, it still has a conception of form. Because it still has that conception of form, it's not the destruction of the conception of conception form. So therefore, it is not given the name destruction of conception of form. So then we have the descriptions of the terms, and I'm sure you're wondering, well, why do we call it the formless realms? And why do we call them infinite space, infinite consciousness, and all that? What are we talking about? Why do we use these terms? Explaining the term formless realm, this has 2 points. The actual is this: in formless realms, there is no form. It sounds like this should be obvious. But there are disputes. It's similar to what we were talking about with, in some respects, it's similar to what we were talking about with the discussion of the factor of samadhi. When you have very little, you say that you have none. Or when you have like 3% battery, you say you have no battery left. It's similar. Some schools say that there is a very, very, very subtle form. It's and so some schools say that. The Great Exposition does not agree with that. So here in this section, we have, there's a lot of debate about this in the, a long passage about this in the auto commentary, and even more in Yashamitra's description of that. We won't go into too much detail here because it would get a little bit overwhelming. So the majority school, this is also what we could call, the Sanskrit word for this is the Mahasanghika school. And others, there are also other schools, Darshtantikas and others, say that the formless is not entirely without form. So there is a little bit of form in the formless realm, they say. But that form there is so subtle, it is said to be formless. Subtle here, there are 2 different ways you can explain subtle. So subtle can either mean that it is tiny, really so tiny you can't see it. Or it can mean that it is like incredibly clear and pristine, like transparent. Actually, Ian Cochran uses the word transparent in this meaning in his discussion of this passage. So it means that it's like either really clear or transparent, or it means that it is extremely tiny. So such a proposal is illogical. If you say that there is form there, but it is incredibly subtle in terms of its aspect of being tiny. So aspect here is in the sense of how it appears as being really tiny. Then tiny aquatic creatures would also be there, like amoebas. You'd have amoebas in the formless realm because they're tiny, right? If it is subtle by nature, in other words, if it is subtle because it's just incredibly clear, then the form realm would also be formless because the forms there are incredibly clear, incredibly like transparent. And if you would say that it's by both, if it's by being extremely, if it's just the extreme subtlety, extreme clarity, then you would only say that actually the only one that could get that moniker or that name is the peak of existence. because that's the subtlest of the subtlest of subtle, the clearest of the clearest of the clear. It's the most subtle. So that would be the only one that you could really call that, because everything else in comparison would be coarse. So that's one reason. So that's why the great expositions say that this position is not logical. On the other hand, the other schools say, well then, merely the forms of vows of body and speech are there, you say. In other words, when there is a vow, the vow of body and speech, then there are the forms of those, and those forms are imperceptible forms. And so those are present in the formless, the other schools say. Vasubandhu, or the great expositions, respond is, they are not. Those imperceptible vows are not present in the formless. The reason is there are neither body nor speech, nor are there any sources, no elements. None of the four elements of earth, water, fire, air are present there. So because there are, when we're saying that there's no body or speech, there's no body or speech whose action you could restrain by a vow, so that there's no way you could have a vow of those. And also the imperceptible forms of the vows arise from earth, water, fire, and air. And so if there are no earth, water, fire, and air there, then there can't be any vows. It is also not acceptable to say, this is the great exposition saying for another reason why it's unacceptable, it is not acceptable to say that they are not on their own level, but are born from other levels similar to undefiled vows. So as we discussed in the 4th chapter when talking about the undefiled vows, they take the elements of their, when they arise, they take the elements of the level on which they arise as their basis, as their cause. But they're undefiled, so they're kind of outside of all the realms, and they can kind of, and so they are not dependent upon being in any of the 3 realms. They can, so they're independent of that. But this is different for a being who's reborn in the form realm, the exposition says, because the forms of vows of body and speech are bound by the bonds of existence and thus cannot exert power over another level. So in other words, when you have, if the vow is formed, if it's a vow other than the undefiled vows, the defiled vows, if they're formed in the desire realm, then they can't exercise any power over the form or the formless realms. If they're born on the formless realm, they can't exercise any power over the desire and the formless. They can only exercise power over their own levels. Therefore, it's illogical for the vows to be present on the level of formless. So from the Sutra of the Great Welcome, this is another objection here. So the other people say, well, it says in the Sutra of the Great Welcome, all those dharmas that are life and that are warmth are mixed. In other words, when you have life and warmth go together. They are not unmixed. There is a certain amount of warmth. I mean, of course, cold-blooded creatures have less warmth, and warm-blooded creatures sometimes have more. They might seem cold-blooded, but that's more of a manner of speaking than actuality. So any sentient being, you've got the mixture of life and warmth. They're not mixed together. That's one reason they say that there has to be form, because on the formless level you're alive. Therefore, you have to have warmth. And the second warm, it says, is that name and form are mutually supporting. And so this is basically when we're talking about the link of interdependence called name and form. These two support each other. One acts as the condition for the other. The form acts as condition for the name aggregates. So name here means mind. And then mind acts as a supporting condition for the form. So if you take away that condition of form, how can the format, how can the name, the aggregates of mind, of the mental factors of mind, wouldn't have a support? And in teaching interdependence, by the condition of consciousness, name and form. So it says that, when you have ignorance is the condition that leads to consciousness. Consciousness leads to name and form. Name and form, in turn, ignorance and formation, then consciousness, name and form, and so forth. So therefore, because it says name and form, that link of interdependence has to have form. Otherwise, it would just be name. Why would it be name and form? It's just name. It's name. It couldn't be name and form. The great exposition response is that these quotations are said with the lower two realms in mind. You're speaking about the form and formless. These aren't not meant to be blanket, all everywhere. If you propose that they apply to all situations, then it would follow that external warmth would also be mixed with life. In other words, if you say that this applies in all situations, then if you're saying that therefore life and warmth always have to be mixed, anytime you have warmth, you have to have life. But we know that that's not true. For example, if you have, what do you have? If you have a campfire, that campfire, it moves. It might look like it's alive, but it's not. It's just a release of energy, right? But if you're saying that, then that would have to be life too. And also, all external forms would depend upon name and arise from consciousness itself. So if you say that the name and form have to be dependent upon each other, then you couldn't have forms arising independent of consciousness. So because of this, these quotations are not proof that there is form and formless, says the Great Exposition. And there's another sutra that says, there are other sutras that also support the idea that there's no form and formless. As it says here, the formless are emancipation from form. Whatever is one of the four peaceful formless emancipations transcends form. In other words, this Buddha says here, the formless ones transcend form. And the Buddha also says there are sentient beings who do not have form. And then lastly, there's a quotation that reads, having transcended the conception of form in all aspects. So these quotations, these three quotations, contradict the propositions of other schools. So the name formless is not arbitrary. There are many different ways you can give names, actually all names. If we follow the teachings of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, all words are essentially arbitrary. Later, Ferdinand de Saussure also said the same thing in Western society. But basically, all names are arbitrary. But here, we're not dealing with that level of analysis. We're talking to the name formless. There's a reason why you're giving the name formless. So therefore, in the formless realm, there is no form, not even the slightest bit. That is why it's called the formless realm. It's not called, we have just a little bit of form. It's called, there's no form, formless. Now then the question is, when you are in the formless realm, there's no form. So in your next birth, how is it that you could then have form? Because there's no form in your continuum. How could that happen? So that's the doubt. So to dispelling a doubt, it says, then form arises from cognition. Well then, when one is born from the formless into a lower realm, for more than a few eons, the continuum of form has been broken. More than a few eons, the lifetime in the formless realm is just extremely long. And during that entire time, you don't have any idea of form or any form, and so there's no form. So how does a form arise again? So the point, the response is, then, at the time form arises, it arises because it acquires entry into the cognition that is stained with the cause of its full ripening. In other words, at that point, when the cognition enters, for example, to take rebirth in a womb in the desire realm. When, at the time that the cognition enters there, it's stained by its karma, and it's kind of propelled by that karma, and then it takes birth at that point in the womb in the form realm. So that is actually a cooperating condition for form. It's not the actual substantial condition for form, but that mind being propelled by its karma and being sustained by the karma is that is like a condition for that to arise. Otherwise, what would you have in the womb? You wouldn't have a new embryo. You would have just, whatever. You just have matter there. You wouldn't have any consciousness, so it wouldn't develop into a being. Because at the moment of birth, you have to have the matter and the sperm, ovum, and the consciousness, right? All three have to come together. And so, as described in the third chapter. So therefore, that mind is now the actual cause of the form there, the substantial cause is the earth, water, fire, air, form, scent, taste, and touch that are combined to create the zygote. I think is that the word? I think the first word is the zygote, or the state of mushiness in the what do we say in the ancient presentation? So that's saying that basically the mind is a cooperating condition that then combines with the for the form to arise as a body. In other words, the molecules have their own separate continuum, and then the mind combines with them to make a new form. The Sutra school says that there is a seed of form in the mind's continuum from which the form arises. And the yogic conduct school, that here, this is referring to the mind-only school, says that form arises from its seeds, which are in the all-ground. Here in the auto commentary, is the Yashomitra, I think it's in the Yashomitra, he says, wait a minute, you all in the mind-only school don't accept that there is any mind. Or don't accept that there's any form. So how are you saying that form can arise? You don't accept the existence of form in the first place. This isn't a problem for you. At any rate, for the Great Exposition and for the Sutra school, it is an issue. Okay, so now we need to know, why are these called infinite consciousness, infinite space, nothing at all? Why are they given these names? Are the sense bases of infinite consciousness and so forth called that because they focus on space and so on? No. Well, then what are they like, you ask? Well, they're called those names because during the training for them, one views the lower level as having faults and things. Consciousness is infinite, space is infinite, there's nothing at all. Now, these are out of order. First, it's infinite space. Second is infinite consciousness. Third is nothing at all. So what this means is that when you are on the level of the fourth dhyana, and you enter the preparations to achieve the first level of formless called consciousness is infinite. On that, space is infinite. On that level of preparation, you look at the forms of the fourth dhyana, and you say that these are coarse, they are painful by nature. Space, on the other hand, is infinite. No, is it infinite consciousness? Infinite consciousness is first. Oh, I'm getting confused. I'm having one of those mornings where my mind is not as clear as usual. You're looking at the level of consciousness as, let me just, hang on, I want to just check. Oh yeah, where are we? Okay, so the first one is infinite consciousness. So it is infinite consciousness first. So the infinite consciousness, that is the first one. So you're on the level of form, and you say, on the fourth level of form, you say, this is coarse, and think, space is infinite. And then because of that, through that contemplation, you eliminate the attachment to the fourth level of form and are reborn and achieve the first level of formless. Now, on that first level of formless, you aren't necessarily meditating consciousness is infinite. That's the preparation. But the name of the preparation, or the contemplation that you do, is given in the preparation is applied as the name for the actual level. Then when you're withdrawing from that level to achieve the second level of formless, then you're thinking space is infinite. Space is even subtler than consciousness. And so you meditate space is infinite, and you are then reborn, and then you achieve the level of the second jhana. And then when you realize, actually, even that is subtle. There is nothing at all. And so you achieve the third level of formless called nothingness, or nothing at all. So these are the three levels. And that's the contemplation that you do in the preparation is the name that is given to the level that arises from it. From training so with such attention, in other words, thinking space in consciousness is infinite, space is infinite, and so forth, they're called by the names infinite consciousness and so forth, infinite space and nothing at all, because of the training. However, any of them can focus on other dharmas. They're not necessarily limited to only focusing on infinite consciousness or infinite space and so forth. Then there's the last one, the fourth jhana, which we mostly in this book is often referred to by the name the peak of existence, because it's the highest level of existence. But its or another name for it is neither conception nor non-conception. So on that level, since the motion of conception is feeble, there is no clear conception. So the conception is feeble, so there is no conception. But it is not total non-conception either. It's not complete absence of conception. It's kind of in between the two. It's an even subtler state. It's like conception is coarse, But even non-conception is just blank. It's complete. It's somewhere even subtler than that. So it's a very subtle level. And so it's this level that's, you can't say it's conception, you can't say it's non-conception. It's, in other words, it's not blank, but it's not conception. So that's one explanation of the name. Alternatively, during the training, one views both coarse conception and non-conception as faulty, and it generates the absorption through the attention that thinks this is neither conception nor non-conception, is peace. In other words, in the absorption, so you're on the third level of formless, the level of nothingness or nothing at all. And on that level of formless, you then, what do we say? On that level of formless, you sort of think, conception is painful. It's like a dart. It's like a tumor. It's like an illness. It's like pain. But then you think, actually, non-conception is just blankness. It's complete blank. That's no good either. So you're kind of aiming for that space that's in between. This which is neither conception or non-conception is peace. So this is the highest level of samsara. So it is also called the peak of existence. This actual absorption is 8 substances. Well, we've got 4 jhanas and 4 formless. That's 8. 4 plus 4 equals 8 usually. Thus, actual absorption is 8 substances, the 4 jhanas and the 4 formless. So understanding them in common, there are 6 topics. Examining their essence, examining the branches of dhyana and the manner in which absorptions are attained, what support manifests them, what sphere they focus on, and identifying what discards afflictions. We will speak about the first of these this morning. So examining their essence. This has 2 topics, classifying in terms of their essence and classifying in the meaning of each classification. So essence here, we're kind of talking about, well, like, what are they? Pure? Are they defiled? Are they virtue? Are they non-virtue? Are they neutral? What are they? That's what we mean by essence, and there are 2 points. So the classifications, first is the classifications of the 7 lower absorptions. 7 are threefold. That is, the 4 form and the first 3 are formless are threefold. Concurrent with enjoyment, pure, and undefiled. So concurrent with enjoyment, there's a little bit of enjoying or craving or attachment there. So that's an afflicted. There's pure, which is defiled virtue, and undefiled. So there are 3 types of these 7 absorptions. The 7 absorptions, other than the peak of existence, are threefold. Absorptions of those with the lowest faculties who have craving, or where there is great craving, view, pride, and doubt, are concurrent with enjoyment. So in other words, they have a little bit, it's like they're saying, oh, this is great. I'm on the 4th dhyana, and it's just like, perfect. I'm on the 2nd form. This is like, great. So that is concurrent with enjoyment. The absorptions of those with medium faculties are pure. So pure is focusing on virtue, and there's no attachment or no craving there. But it's still not undefiled. And the absorptions of those with the highest faculties are undefiled. So we've got these 3. We've got the concurrent with enjoyment, which is neutral. It's got a bit of craving there. You've got the pure. There's no craving, but it's still defiled. And then you've got the undefiled. Those are the 3 types. So the classifications of the peak of existence. The 8th is twofold. The 8th, the peak of existence, is twofold. It can be concurrent with enjoyment or pure, but there is no undefiled peak of existence, because the peak of existence is the highest level. And so if you had the undefiled absorptions are its own antidote, so it can't support them. Therefore, there can't be an undefiled on the level of the peak of existence. So, the meaning of each classification. The one concurrent with enjoyment has craving. Virtue of the worldly is pure, and that which is what that enjoys. The undefiled transcends the world. So, in other words, there's the concurrent with enjoyment that has craving, right? And the virtue of the worldly is pure. And so that purity, or that sort of virtue, is the one that the first one, the one that has craving, enjoys. Then you have the undefiled, which transcends the world. So the one called concurrent with enjoyment has the concurrence with craving. In other words, there's a mental factor of craving that is associated with it. It is also concurrent with other afflictions, of course. I mean, there's pride and so forth. But the reason that only craving is taught here is because craving is realized to be the greatest hindrance to emancipating oneself from the higher levels. Because you're enjoying it, you're attached to it. And that attachment is what is really keeping you from being liberated from the higher levels. The virtue of the worldly absorptions is called pure because it is concurrent with non-greed and other positive dharmas. So it's it has the virtuous mental factors of non-greed and so forth. So what does the concurrent with enjoyment enjoy, you ask? Pure absorption passes, and immediately after which is what the experience that concurrent with enjoyment enjoys. So in other words, you have a pure absorption. It ceases because it's like any other moment, like any other mind. It is impermanent and ceasing in every moment. And the next moment, you're kind of looking back on it and saying, "Oh, that was great." It is regression from that which it experiences. So it's not like it directly experiences. It's kind of like remembering and saying, "Oh, that was really nice." The undefiled absorption transcends the world and takes the truths as aspects. So it is as the aspects. This means it has the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths as its primary aspects. So that is enough for the text in this morning class, and I think there may be a few questions here. Okay, one-pointedness here. Is this the same, is one-pointedness described here the same as in the context of the 4 yogas of Mahamudra? It is different than those 4 yogas of Mahamudra. And the reason it is different is that in the, when you're achieving the levels of form, you're separating yourself from attachment to the desire realm and then the successive levels of the form realm. And so resting one-pointedly there. And so that's what the dhyanas are. You're kind of withdrawing from the world, the realm of the world. In the Mahamudra tradition, the method is to rest one-pointedly without blocking anything, without withdrawing from anything. So it's different. The word is the same. The word itself, one-pointed, essentially just means the, what do we say? It means that the mind is resting without distraction and so forth. The second question is there recognition in the formless realm? I believe there is. The formless realms are not completely non-conceptual. So recognition essentially means when you perceive something in one instant, and then the next instant you say, this is that. That's what we mean by recognition. You see a human being, and then you say, that is Tashi, right? Or you say, that is Wangmo, that is Gendun, whatever name you're going to give to it. That's essentially, you recognize that's who it is. So that can, of course, in the formless realm, there wouldn't be recognition from form. So the next is explain absorption of body, speech, and mind. When we talk about absorption, essentially what we're talking with absorption is deep meditation. And when you're in the desire realm and in the formless realms, it would be involve the body, speech, and mind. Now, there are going to be different explanations of it in different traditions and different meanings. So if you're thinking about this from another teaching, then it could mean, it could have a slightly different meaning. But here, we're essentially, the absorption, we're talking about the form and the formless realms are primarily what we're speaking about. Okay, so the next question is, so at the peak of existence, would you be able to say that since it is not conception nor a non-conception, it is a mind free from conceptuality altogether and resting in a state of pure awareness and seeing the ultimate nature of things just as they are, which is unarisen and unceasing? This is a very good question. There's an important distinction between this and the Dzogchen and what do we say? The Dzogchen and Mahamudra presentations of the ultimate nature. The peak of existence is like withdrawing from further and further levels of line. So you're completely withdrawing from the experience of the world around us as we know it. And entering this level of the formless meditation. So it's completely withdrawing from the world. In the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen, the approach is completely different. It's that you don't withdraw at all from the world. You actually just see the nature of the experiences that you have. And so that's where you come to know that ultimate unborn nature and see everything as unarising and ceasing. So on the formless realm, there's no discussion of things being unarising and unceasing. That comment, that just doesn't, at least not in the Great Exposition. It's more like a very subtle, very, very, very stable state of shamatha meditation with no insight. When you talk about having the perceptions of things of non-arising and unceasing, then you're talking about a very high level of insight. So in the formless realms, they are, as it says in the previous chapter, they are primarily shamatha, but from the perspective of Mahamudra and probably also from Dzogchen, they're just completely shamatha meditation. Similarly, with the dhyana meditations, from the perspective of the Great Exposition, they're said to be like a good balance of insight and shamatha, but from the perspective of the Mahamudra, they're lacking in insight because they don't actually have the insight into the true non-dual nature of phenomena. So they're all a little bit different. Basically, from the Mahamudra tradition, all of these levels are taught to be very deep levels of shamatha meditation. Okay, so those are the questions. Now, of course, we might think, therefore, oh yeah, no, I don't want to do those. You definitely don't. I mean, if you're on the level of the, well, actually, they're taught in the Mahayana Sutras, and it's taught that bodhisattvas practice these. But for a bodhisattva, being reborn in the formless realm is like a total waste of time, because when you're in the formless realm, you can't benefit anyone. So it's important for us to, keep that in mind as if you're a Mahayana practitioner. But they're taught in the sutras, there are benefits and there are uses to them. And you might be on that level where actually practicing them is beneficial. You won't get the actual instructions on how to enter them from the Tibetan tradition because we don't practice them. You'd have to get those from another tradition. But generally, they're very powerful levels of meditation, especially the dhyana, where we've got that balance of insight, or at least the Great Exposition idea of insight and shamatha meditation. So they're not totally worthless. On the other hand, we have to distinguish that if what we want to practice is Mahamudra and Dzogchen, that they're not necessarily, that they're not quite the same as what we practice. Okay. So we will now recite the dedication prayers. So I'd like to ask you all to please think to yourself that through the merit of us teaching and listening to the Dharma, may that represent all of the Dharmas, all the virtues of all sentient beings throughout space, wherever, in any time. And may we dedicate all of this virtue so that all beings may swiftly achieve the state of Buddhahood, and until such time be free from all of the temporary sufferings of war, famine, natural disasters, wildfires, floods, and epidemic, illness, and any other sort of suffering. So please, keeping this in mind, let us please recite these dedications of merit. Osanam nitam jesipani tobne nye peranam pamchete kyegana chi balong chobai sipe zolero Kunyorol Sho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy wrongdoing, and free all beings swiftly from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Chancho semcho rinpoche ma ke panam ke jurje ke pa nyamba me baryang gong gongdu pelwar sho. May bodhicitta, great and precious, arise in those who have not roused it, never weakening in those who have. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. So, thank you very much, and we will